All right, so I've got 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock, depending where you are in the state. So today we've got, just one other announcement. If you missed Mondays, this morning I uploaded the nematode talk to the YouTube. So I'll send out the link to that for you guys that missed that. It's a really good presentation about management for soybean cysts. And today we've got Bill Johnson, who's going to talk about the war on weeds. And I bet, and I guess our format here, Bill would like, we can do it, type in chats. Feel free to ask any questions without, and I can interrupt and ask them that. I'm sure people will probably have lots of questions on where are we going here with dicamba after yesterday's news. So I'll let Bill take over.
Okay, Phil, I'm going to share my screen here, so hopefully this comes through. All right, and we looking good there? All right, I'm going to go ahead and put this in presentation mode then, and let me know if there are any problems. So like I said, if you have questions, I'd be happy to take them during the course of this presentation. I really don't intend for all this content for just to be me speaking for the entire 15 minutes. Do have a couple of topics to talk about in addition to dicamba, and I'll tell you everything I know about this whole dicamba thing, and I'll give you some links too that you can look at if you want to monitor this on your own as well. So I'm going to put this in the presentation mode then, and go ahead and get started from there. Okay, hopefully this is coming through. So again, a couple of different topics I'm going to discuss today. Again, here's the slide that we typically show at the beginning of our presentations. If you need to access information on weed science, feel free to take a picture of this or capture the screen or whatever you would like to do. We are working on an updated web page. We've had a very clunky system to update web pages, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go to a new system that gives us a lot more control over it, and so hopefully we'll be able to be more timely in getting some of the stuff updated on that web page. So look for that sometime later this summer. We don't have it ready to go just yet. Okay, so what do we have going on this summer? Well, I think the top three things have been, probably the three things that have dominated most of my time so far, and particularly the first one until this morning anyway. That first item with corn replant and termination of the initial stand has really become a big issue over the last 10 days or so. So again, this is caused by corn sitting in cool, wet soils or flooding or something along those lines. And guys now, since it's early June, are kind of in the replant mode. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One observation I've made as I've had a chance to drive around the state a little bit is just the number of fields that don't have residual herbicides on them. And I know, the farm economy is tough right now, and we're looking to cut costs, but it's really pretty eye-opening how many weedy corn fields that we have in addition to weedy soybean fields. So I'm afraid what we've done is, with the trait technology that we have in soybeans, is we've gone back to our default behavior of just getting the beans planted and trying to spray our way out of it, so to speak, with lots of post-emerge herbicide trips. And again, that's kind of a recipe for disaster, but it appears like that's where we're heading. In terms of what we're doing with our residual herbicides. I'm going to go into a little bit of a discussion on this dicamba cutoff date. I had some stuff prepared yesterday that kind of talked about, looking at the weather forecast, with our June 20th original cutoff date. So far there's been no change to that June 20th cutoff date, but I wanted to kind of outline some scenarios for those of you that are doing some of your own spraying. And then just, a few things related to cover crop termination and some other things as well we'll discuss, just depending on how things progress through this time period. All right, the corn replant situation. So the top link there in blue is an extension publication we wrote on this a couple of weeks ago. It outlines all the options available for terminating the initial stand of corn if you're in a replant type of a situation. And you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything here. None of these herbicide options are really all that great. You know, tillage is still the best option by far to get out there, terminate it quickly and thoroughly, and be able to replant your crop. And I do have these things kind of ranked in the order of effectiveness. If you're just dead set against tillage, or you might be a little bit on the wet side and you don't want to till, but you can get a sprayer over the field, Gramoxone Syncor is going to be relatively quick. You can replant immediately, but depending on where that growing point is, that may not be 100% successful. If that growing point is still below the ground and the Gramoxone doesn't get to the growing point, you may have some corn regrowing from the initial stand. If you're going to, you know, really try to manage that Gramoxone Syncor treatment, what I would do is I would spray that as late in the day as possible, so you get as much translocation of the Gramoxone into the corn plant before it's activated by light. So if you can spray late in the day, get a lot of it into the plant, you'll get more translocation, you'll have better success the next day. The clethodim products will all have a 6-day waiting interval. So clethodim is a post-emergence grass herbicide used a lot for volunteer corn when we tank mix it with glyphosate for applications to soybeans, but it can also be used in a replant situation. But again, there's a 6-day waiting interval. You can also use Assure, but you also have a waiting interval with Assure as well. So again, you know, those options kind of have their limitations as well if you're in a rush to get back in the field. Liberty can be used if your initial corn that you planted doesn't have the Liberty Link trait. Sometimes that Liberty Link trait is hidden. It doesn't necessarily say on the bag that it has a Liberty Link trait, because the Liberty trait is linked with an insect protection trait that's used as a marker. So you just have to make sure that your initial stand is not Liberty Link. You should use the 32 or 34 ounce rate of Liberty. If you can put some Syncor with that, that'll help it out as well. But again, with this one here, it's rarely 100% successful. And if you do plant Liberty Link corn, you do have the ability to follow up with a second treatment of Liberty to kill that stand that you didn't get with the first application. So anyway, Phil, what I might do is just stop and see if there's any questions on this volunteer corn and replant situation before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, there's not too many people, so if you want to unmute and ask them yourself or do in the chat, whichever you feel comfortable with, now is the time.
So I was able to open up the chat box. I don't see anything in the chat, but if you guys have got any questions you'd like to ask on that topic, I'd be happy to take them at the current time. Okay, and if something comes up later, if something pops into your mind a couple minutes from now, I'd be happy to take them at any time. So again, we're pretty flexible with the time here. Okay, let's talk about this next topic here, what happened to the residual herbicides. I'll put this back in the presentation mode. So again, I've just been really quite surprised by the number of weedy fields we have, both corn and soybeans. And I think we've done a pretty good job over the last 10 years or so of emphasizing the importance of these residual herbicides, because it decreases the selection pressure out of our post-emerge herbicides for resistant weeds. So I do think we've taken a pretty major step backwards in the wrong direction. And so again, I'll say the same thing now that I said 17 or 18 years ago, if we're going to get into these weed control programs where we're totally reliant on post herbicides and we don't blink an eye about spraying 2 or 3 times during the course of the summer, we will push that resistance curve very quickly. And I would say that, less than 5 years, we'll have dicamba or 2,4-D resistant weeds if that's going to be our primary broadleaf herbicide. So hopefully we can get that turned back around. But again, I do feel we've taken a step backwards on that situation this year. Okay, let's move on then. Let's talk a little bit about herbicide drift. So overall, the complaint numbers are down this year, and I don't think that's because we don't have spray drift. I think it's a function of it's a little bit more because of our social distancing concerns. It's a little bit more of an ordeal to get a sample sent in. I mean, we're still fully staffed at the PPDL. The specialists are still working to process these samples as the PPDL notifies us at them. So nothing has really changed there. There just might be a little bit more of a unique process for getting the samples turned in. So, it has picked up in the last week or so. So we're seeing the typical early season stuff: Sharpen, 2,4-D, dicamba, glyphosate. And, again, those are the things that we usually see during this early part of the growing season. I did have Dave Scott send me a note that said the first dicamba post-emerge complaint had been filed, coincidentally the same day that the Ninth Circuit Court decided to vacate the EPA labels. So that was kind of coincidental. So anyway, we're just getting started on our post-emerge spray season, and still some moving parts here, but I'll go through some examples here in a little bit as far as kind of what we're up against from a weather standpoint with some of these labels for the auxin herbicides. So on the left here, what you see is some growth regulator damage in a tree. Remember that red buds and oaks are really, really sensitive to these growth regulator herbicides. So I live on a rural property, kind of out in the middle of a cornfield, and had a couple of redbud trees that have gotten whacked 3 years in a row now, and one of them died. I've got some oak trees that are showing some pretty severe symptomology, and these are all from burn down treatments because there aren't any soybeans within a quarter of a mile of me yet. So I'm interested to see what my post-emerge season looks like on my own personal property. On my right-hand side, which I guess would be the same for you guys because you're all sitting in front of a computer screen as well, that's kind of what sharpen damage looks like on a tree species. So you kind of see the speckles there. Okay, so moving on now. So I put this slide together yesterday and wanted to kind of go through, just and highlight some of the challenges that you're faced with dealing with these growth regulator herbicides that are labeled for use in soybeans. So again, this was yesterday before I heard anything about the announcement last night about the Ninth Circuit Court. So this is weather data. This is off Weather Underground, so it kind of gives you a good snapshot. And I picked out the 10-day forecast, as you can see here. So yesterday was the 3rd. Today is the 4th. So if we think about the label restrictions over the next 10 days and when we can legally run this sprayer somewhere near Lafayette, Indiana, okay, so again, this is specific to Lafayette, Indiana. Remember that the label says that you cannot spray if rain is forecast within 24 hours. So that would take us out of a spray date, regardless of what the winds look like. That would take us out of a spray date here on Monday the 8th because we have rain forecast on Tuesday and Wednesday. All right. So again, we're not able to spray today because of rain. We're not able to spray tomorrow because of rain. Again, from a legal standpoint, okay, I know there's sprayers out there in the field that are running, but from a legal standpoint, we're not able to do this. Now, if we take a look at this lower graph here shows you the wind speeds. Okay, so 10 mile an hour is the upper cutoff, 3 mile an hour is the lower cutoff. So what you can see here is tomorrow, Friday the 5th, our wind speeds are pretty good between about this time of day, which again, this is going to be somewhat well into the morning. So the dark shading here would be nighttime. So remember, we can't spray if we're within an hour of sunrise or sunset. So if we kind of get out of that window, our wind speeds are pretty favorable for a pretty big window of time on Friday and again on Saturday. We're kind of in between that 3 to 10 mile an hour wind speed. Okay, now as we get into these days here, again, we're just talking scattered rainstorms, but from a rain standpoint, this would be in a legal application on Tuesday, but let's go back to Monday. So Monday, let's say we decided we're gonna roll the dice and go ahead and try to spray on that day, even though there's rain forecast the next day. If you look at our wind speeds here, we have we're butted right up against 10 mile an hour. So this is probably sometime in the early afternoon, early to mid afternoon. What you can see here is our wind speeds are butted right up against 10 mile an hour. If you look at the wind direction, that's what those arrows are, wind direction. And I have a sensitive field right here. This is a no spray day for 3 reasons. 1, the wind is blowing in that direction. 2, you have rain forecast the next day. So 2 reasons, I should say, rather than 3. Okay. Now, if you were going to wait till the wind is blowing in a different direction, or you wanted to try to time that spray application, you could come back to Saturday the 6th and your wind is not blowing towards that sensitive field, and it's also within the ranges here. Now, when we come up to Tuesday and Wednesday, look at these wind speeds. These wind speeds are above 10 mile an hour for most of the next 3 days, and even somewhat into Friday the 12th. So again, as we take a look at this 10-day forecast, if we had to plan a day where we can operate that sprayer most of the day, you really have 2 out of the next 10 days based on the weather forecast for this site. And then what you hope is that your sensitive field is not south on this day. You hope it's not to the west on this day. So again, just some of the realities that we face with that technology. Okay, now let's move on into what happened yesterday. So here's one website. So if you go to the web and you typed in XtendiMax herbicide update, it will take you to this page, which is going to be updated pretty frequently. So the Ninth Circuit Court issued a ruling that vacates the current U.S. registrations of these dicamba products that are labeled for use in soybeans. So the 3 products that it vacated were XtendiMax, Engenia, and Fexapan. It did not rule on Tavium, which is the 4th product. That's a Syngenta product. So this kind of tells you, gives you an update of what's going to be happening. The reality of the matter is that it is now up to the states to issue a ruling on whether or not they want to enforce this label vacated situation. So my guess is that some states will decide to go ahead and say, we're done. We're not going to spray anymore. We're not going to spray any more of these 3 herbicides. Other states will say, well, we need to spend more time thinking about this and allow the applications to go ahead and take place. So I don't have a good feel for what each state is going to do. Again, that's going to be up to the state regulatory agency in each state to do that. So Dave Scott with our Indiana State Chemist's office sent an email out to a couple dozen people first thing this morning, and basically said, he said, rather than bombard us with questions, go to this website right here. We will post updates on this situation as decisions are made in our office. And so here's the website. It's www.oisc.purdue.edu and then /pesticide/dicamba. it will take you, whoops, it will take you to that website and allow you to access their information and their ruling on this situation. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and take some questions here. Okay, so I did have someone indicate that the rain restriction was changed to only if rain is going to run off. So again, I think if we go back to this rainfall graphic here, you know, you could look at Tuesday the 9th, and based on soil moisture conditions that you have in a specific field, you have to make a judgment call to determine whether or not that amount of rain would cause runoff. Around here in Lafayette, Indiana, 6,200s would not cause runoff based on how dry we are down here. There may be other parts of the state where that answer would be different. All right. Any other questions, I guess, on this dicamba topic before we move on? Questions or comments?
Hey, Dr. Johnson, this is Jeff Shorgen out of Wabash County. So if we had a farmer call in today and say, hey, you know, we don't know about this dicamba, I've got it in the tank, can I go out and spray it? Are they allowed to spray it at this point? Or are we supposed to tell them hold off until things come through? No. Right, as of right now, the label, the state labels we have are still valid, and the state labels are still being honored. So as long as he's within the, you know, within the guidelines listed on the label, he is able to spray. So nothing has been stopped in Indiana. Okay. Dave Scott would have indicated to us if that was the case, and he can spray. Gotcha. Thank you. Yep. Good question.
Will you be sending updates if that changes? I mean, I don't want to have to go to that page every day to check it. Will there be somebody checking it and sending it out to the extension educators?
I'm guessing Dave will do that. I mean, if Dave sends a note to me, I will, and I happen to be in front of a computer where I can do it, I will get that forwarded to everyone. But there is a chance I'm in the field and not always in front of a computer. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so I think I'm going to move on to the next topic now. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so let's see here. Enlist soybeans. You know, again, there's a few acres of those out there, a few more acres than we've had in the past. It's my understanding that it's going to be pretty rare to find soybeans that are not E3, so I need to update that statement. We do have application restrictions with the 2,4-D products that are labeled for use in Enlist as well. So again, those can be referenced here, and there's also a website that you can go to that breaks it down into pretty simplistic terms as well. So, you know, one of the things I think that we're going to be faced with this year, and we kind of tried to get ready for that last year, is we're going to have both 2,4-D and dicamba moving around and injuring stuff that's sensitive. And so just wanted to provide a little bit of guidance on what you might be looking at. So typically with 2,4-D injury on soybeans that don't have 2,4-D resistance, you see callus formation on the stem. You see the leaf symptomology is different. From a distance, it can look similar, but from a distance, you see more of the leaf strapping. You'll see more of the stem bending and twisting and that sort of thing. You know, whereas with dicamba, you get the leaf cupping. If the rates are high enough, you'll kill the meristems, and you don't get quite as much symptomology as far as the twisting of the stems and the callus formation of the stems with dicamba as you do for 2,4-D. So again, it takes a little bit of practice to kind of get better at looking at this stuff, because sometimes you'll see some symptomology mixed in a field, but if you look at enough plants, you can probably nail it down to which one was doing the worst damage. We do have an extension publication that we put together on this, WS56 or PPP 126. So it's got some of those same photographs in there if that's of any use for you. All right. So any questions on that topic before we move on to the next one? All right, so we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so this is one I kind of went over in the wintertime last year. So I thought, based on how bad some of the weather we've had this year, especially in the northern part of the state, here's our things that are kind of reminders, I guess, moving into to possibly some prevent plant for this year. Don't let the high seed producers go to seed. If you can get out there and do something in those spots, fill in some soybeans if nothing else, because at least that will provide some canopy to suppress weeds. I don't know if we'll be able to plant cover crops in some of these drowned out fields. I suppose that's to be determined, but anything you can do to cover that soil with something, get something growing out there other than letting the weeds go to seed is kind of a big deal. Again, if as you're thinking about areas this year that you still may not have planted yet, if you can plant a crop trait that allows you to use some pretty powerful post-emerge herbicides, that's a good thing. At this stage of the game, I'd kind of wait to see what happens with dicamba before I would put extend seed in those fields. Give that a day or two and see if there's any resolution there. Regardless of what happens in the short term with this circuit court decision, we only have about 16 or 17 days left to spray dicamba, even if nothing happens with that circuit court decision. So your best bet is probably going to be to use something that allows you to spray after June 20th. So kind of keep that in mind if you have some of these drowned out areas that you need to do something for. And again, if these areas are not highly prone to erosion, tillage still works pretty well for tearing up weeds. So don't neglect to use those tactics as well. Herbicide carryover concerns. So last year, again, this is a slide I used last winter. So this is really the time of the year to start looking for some of these things. I have seen a field or two that's showing some. It's probably classic or first-rate symptomology. Stunted corn, it's typical ALS damage that we see in corn. So we've also seen a few fields that have some Flexstar or Formicifin carryover. So those are out there as well. Probably the biggest thing that we're seeing this year would be a lot of the cost of Callisto herbicide has basically dropped, where they're almost giving you the stuff if you buy the jug. And so everybody's putting Callisto in the spray tank, and in these fields that are staying wet, you can see some Callisto injury symptoms on overlap areas and some of the areas where the sprayer might have slowed down. So again, if we take a look at some of the things that we would be seeing, so if you go to the far right here, this is what ALS carryover looks like. So things like Classic, Pursuit, and First Rate. This is what Flexstar carryover looks like in corn. We haven't seen atrazine carryover in soybeans yet, and we haven't seen any of this Group 27 carryover yet, but we have seen some of this HPPD injury on corn this year from Callisto applied this year, again, just because I think everybody and their brothers dropping that stuff in the spray tank because the price has dropped so much. So again, these are kind of some things to keep in mind as you're looking at some of these fields that might have some stressed looking corn in it. So again, this is just a reminder, and again, reminder from last year and reminder going into next year as we get into some of these delayed planting situations. Here are the rotational restrictions for some commonly used herbicides that are a little bit on the long side. So, atrazine, we're 7 days from, if you apply atrazine after June 10th, the label says you have to rotate to corn or sorghum the next year. Callisto is a 10-month rotational restriction to soybeans. Pursuit, Classic, and First Rate are in that 8 to 9 month range for rotating to corn, and then the FlexStar products would be 10 months for rotating to corn. All right, so I think I'll stop right there. Any questions on the herbicide carryover topic before we kind of move on to the next one? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat either. All right, let's talk a little bit about cover crops, and then we'll move on to basically just kind of finishing out the section with some questions here. Okay, so again, this year we had kind of an extended cool, cloudy period. We did see some situations where the atrazine premixes were antagonistic to glyphosate, kind of Man, you guys missed the best part of the presentation.
Yeah.
All right, hopefully you followed along with the slides there.
You were frozen.
Okay.
We
All right.
lost you at when you started talking the cover crops.
All right, okay.
Well, don't feel bad. For another program, I didn't realize that I lost connection. I talked for close to an hour before I realized it. The good thing in that case is someone else took over the presentation. We were sharing the job that night, so.
Well, that's called teamwork. And did you write an impact statement on that?
Not yet.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe the thing that I would kind of finish off with here. Just on herbicide carryover to cover crops, because this is another good time to be thinking about this. So this information really hasn't changed for a decade or so. These are just kind of the lookouts in terms of things to think about if you're gonna plant cover crops in the fall. So I'll just let you guys kind of read those. The big thing is if you plant a mixture, a cover crop seed source that has a mixture of seed, it's pretty rare that something doesn't grab and grow in there, right? Not that I'm a big fan of the mixtures, because I think there's, you end up with a lot of stuff in there that's not cover crop that ends up being weeds. But, typically if you have concerns about carryover, that's kind of what I tell people: plant a mixture, something that has cereal rye plus whatever else you think you need for that field.
Bill, you're not sharing your screen right now.
Okay. All right. This is why I don't do these for a living. Okay. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Again, these are the lookouts as far as herbicide use this year and things
Nope.
to maybe.
We're not seeing it.
Okay. Well, let's see here if I can share my screen. All right. You see it? You see it now?
Yep.
All right. So this is like the fourth time I've gone through this. All right. This should be perfect this time. Okay. So again, these are kind of the lookouts. A lot of this information is a decade old, even though we've continued to do cover crop studies all along. I've just got one master student that finished up and another one that should finish up here in the next month, and started a new one, a new PhD student. So, but again, these things, haven't changed even as we collect more data from my program and programs in adjacent states. Cereal rye appears to be pretty resilient. We can grow that stuff just about anywhere, and it's probably the most flexible in terms of the herbicides that we use in the current season. Where you really run into some sensitivities is particularly with things like the brassicas and the radishes. Those can be sensitive to the Callisto type herbicides, the ALS inhibitors like Classic, First Rate, Pursuit, and then the stinger, the herbicides that have stinger in them. And again, the big thing is I think too many people will call me a week ahead of time and say, well, am I going to have a problem? You really need to be thinking about these herbicide residues a month ahead of time. And if you have some concerns, do some sort of a bioassay. Get your seed bought early. drop that seed in some soil, put water to it, and see if it comes up. If it comes up in a bucket with some soil and a little bit of water, you should be in good shape. Okay, that's kind of my presentation. So I am happy to report we've got most of our research sites planted. We actually planted CPAC yesterday. That was the last main one we had to do. So things are progressing nicely. Sure wish we could have a field day and show you guys what we're up to, but I got to work within the rules of my employer. So any questions? Bob or Phil, anything we need to cover that's specific to your areas?
I just was going to ask, when we're thinking of cover crops, going into the fall, you in your mind kind of account for what weather we had during that growing season? I mean, for example, last year, at least in Marshall County, we were fairly dry during that growing season, and hopefully they're right this year and we're going to get more moisture. Do you think of that at all, or you just rely on the bioassay?
Well, okay, so with these guidelines here, if I had a weather extreme, either too wet or too dry, well, okay, so let me give you a specific example. So let's say I wanted to do some kind of a legume or a brassica in the fall, but I used a herbicide like a Canopy pre-emergence, and I used some Pursuit post-emergence. And again, so I'm kind of down here in this bullet right here. And I wanted to do a legume or some kind of a brassica in the fall. If I had, if I'm getting 7 or 8 inches of rain in July and another 7 or 8 inches in August, I would say, well, maybe I can get by with that this year. Okay, so that's when I would do a bioassay. If I had a drought and I used those 2 herbicides, let's say I got an inch of rain in July and an inch in August, then I would say there's no way those legumes or brassicas are going to take in the fall. I need to go with something like cereal rye, because like I said, cereal rye, cereal rye is very resilient to just about anything we use. So, it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, Bob, but these general guidelines cover probably 80% of the weather that we have in the state of Indiana. When you get into the extremes, whether it's severe drought or too much water, then that's when you got to fall back on the bioassay if you're in kind of one of these situations here where you've used some herbicides that could cause problems for a specific species of cover crop.
Makes sense.
Do you have any updates on new resistance in weed populations?
Well, so the big, probably the thing that we're looking at very closely now is how are some of our weeds responding to 2,4-D and dicamba? Because again, I do think we're in a market now where the residual herbicides are not being used, and we're going to try to spray our way out of this with 2,4-D or dicamba. So water hemp, horseweed or mare's tail are 2 weeds in particular that can be kind of marginally controlled by these growth regulator herbicides anyway. So nothing to report, but we do have populations that appear to be more tolerant than other populations. We'll look at those in some more detail. And then the other thing would be is to keep our eyes on things like barnyard grass and glyphosate, because there's a cousin of barnyard grass called jungle rice that's been shown to be resistant in western Tennessee to glyphosate, and so that'll be something that that we'll be looking at barnyard grass pretty closely up here for the next couple of years.
Wow.
All right.
If I'm remembering right, you had there was some either water hemp or palmer that wasn't fully killed by the not full rate, but it was still labeled rate of the dicamba. Is that correct?
We've got some water hemp populations that have us scratching our heads. And some of them, one of those was not too far from you. So kind of somewhere between me and Penny, which is kind of where you are. And then we had some palmer. We had some palmer that was showing some tolerance to 2,4-D that we discovered about 5 years ago. So I've got a new grad student recruited that I'm going to have her spend a little bit of time on that. And that same population wasn't well controlled by Callisto either. But that palmer came. I got to remember where that came from. That came from Southern Indiana. That wasn't your palmer. But we've got about 3 different populations of water hemp that we're looking at more closely for as far as its control with 2,4-D and dicamba. All right. Any other questions? So I apologize for my ineptness with technology. I just blame it on my dad. It's a genetic trait.
Oh, you did fine, Bill. I mean, it's just that's what we have to do with this technology. I mean, you shared pertinent information, and people can ask questions if they have questions for you. Isn't there a water hemp in Illinois that's we don't want in the state of Indiana?
Yeah, none of it. Yeah,
don't they have one that's resistant to multiple herbicides more so than even what we have?
Yeah, they've identified a population that's resistant to the group 15 herbicides, which would be, like Dual, Outlook, Warrant, those type of products. And it's a metabolism-based resistance rather than a target site. So that metabolism-based resistance, typically when a weed has that, it can metabolize not only the herbicide that you're concerned about, but it can metabolize other herbicides as well.
Wow.
So so once that gene pool spreads into a weed population, you're basically back to non-herbicide methods to try to beat that one back.
All right, so if no one has any more questions, I put the that CCA info on the screen there. So you can do that, or you can send me an email with your license number. Same with the commercial applicator license as well. Send me an email. I'll get that sent in for you. So thanks, Bill, for coming, logging in today. Next week is our last session. We've got Sean Castile. I'm going to talk about some soybeans. And hopefully by then we'll have some word from the state on the dicamba situation. So.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Phil.
Yep.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
See y'all.
And not to put you on the spot, Bill, but the fact that they're not posting anything yet, at least that's giving us days, and it's kind of a good, I would think that's a good sign, not a bad sign.
You mean in terms of the state chemist?
Yeah.
Yeah, but so my read on it is I don't know that anybody was expecting to have to react to it, um, you know, today. And so, my guess is that they're trying to decide, all right, what's the best path forward, given, you know, given the situation we're in as far as the number of acres that we've already planted to extend beans. What does the landscape look like now in terms of off-target movement? I mean, I know we had folks spraying earlier in the week with gale force winds, so I'm anticipating, samples coming in about 10 to 14 days when they start displaying some of those symptomologies. But so I think there's just a lot of things that they're trying to factor in before they make a call on this. And in my guess, some of these states are talking to each other as well to, just to make sure that they make the right decision, or the best decision, I should say. So yeah, the message right now is until you hear something from the state chemist, you can continue to use the product according to label directions.
Bill, in the past when things have gone off, they discontinued products or whatever, basically if you had it in the warehouse, you could still use it. But this is a little different deal, I think. But am I correct on that?
Yeah, if I think back to the days of things like Bladex, Lorsban, you could use up existing inventory. But, those products had different, there was a different issues with those. I mean, we knew the phase out was coming, and it wasn't such a sudden thing like this is.
Well, it wasn't a court case saying shut it down.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I'm no legal expert, so I don't know how to read what's going on. Whatever they decide to do is whatever they decide to do. If they ask my opinion, I'll give my opinion. But, they make the decision. I don't make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
I've only got one phone call so far this morning about it, but he didn't even have any dicamba beans planted. So.
Yeah. Yeah, my email started going off about 6 a.m. this morning, and the phone started ringing about a half hour after that. So, yeah, I wasn't expecting to be doing that today.